Welcome to episode 46 of Radio Omnicore. I'm Colin McClintock, your host, and in this episode we catch up with Colin Brown from the Happy Sandpit, and he shares with us his insights into the companies, in fact, that did the best during COVID, and what was it that helped them to get through this time and be productive and encourage engagement within their teams. And let's jump straight into the episode. We're really looking forward to chatting to you today about, what's changed in your world of engagement. So welcome.
Thank you. And it's wonderful. It's wonderful to be back. Thank you for that. And well done on 46 episodes. That's amazing. It's a real achievement.
Thank you. And Hilton, do you want to give Colin some feedback on how that session impacted you and continues to do so at Omnicore today?
Just remind me.
So you instituted the coffee on people's birthdays, and yesterday I kind of had mine with Hilton because it was my birthday this month, but he ended it because he was like, we're too busy, let's do this another time. But yeah, your last session really made us think. We loved your book. It was in our beautiful quiet room, which is now a thing of the past, unfortunately, because we're all remote. So why don't you just catch us up in the last 3 years when we last saw you, and I suppose specifically the last 2 years. What you've been up to?
Do you know, it's quite hard to remember. We were just reflecting this morning, my wife and I, about how it's December 2021, and actually, with the current way, this new variant of the coronavirus, it seems like we're right back where we were in February 2020. It's just so strange, and it's so dislocating. I mean, the truth of the matter is these have been very weird years for business, and I think that's probably true for a lot of people. I mean, so when I think about going into 2020, I mean, I say to people, I haven't seen you for a year, and I mean two. I forget, But we're going into 2020. We had a really spectacular year ahead of us, by the looks of things. We had a 3-day field trip, one of our famous 3-day field trips lined up which was oversubscribed, and it hadn't ever happened that early before. And we're going to go and see some fabulous organizations, and there was lots of things like that going on. And then bit by bit, it just, logically things got postponed initially, then cancelled. And we actually found ourselves around about May last year with just nothing in the shop. And that had just never happened before. But what was quite eerie was that it continued through June and July and August. There was probably 5 months of absolutely zero revenue, zero work. And I mean, through all of that, it's quite a frightening thing. I mean, I had the feeling that with the move to remote work, that culture would get a major upgrade, that this would be the thing that people would worry about. But I'll tell you a little story about this in a minute. And we've actually written a whole workshop, which is a second book is going to be based on this, because the way we perceived it was very, very different to what we thought would happen. And I think I understand it now, and I'll explain that in a moment. But so we didn't, the one thing about it was having nowhere to go and nothing to do, and being locked down inside a house and homeschooling and all of that dislocation on top of it meant that it really wasn't a brilliant middle of last year at all. But it did have one upside, and that was that for the first time ever since the hamster wheel stopped, we had the opportunity to get off it. And that just hadn't happened before, right? And it's an interesting thing when you have the opportunity to just stand back and reflect and kind of go, what am I doing here that I like doing? What am I doing here that I don't like doing and I don't want to do anymore? What am I best at? And what am I kind of like, I'm just a bit average at this, and I'm being asked to do it by clients, but the reality is I should be passing on the work. Because a lot of stuff just gets cojoined and things get bolted onto things. And that was a really, really almost cathartic type experience to be able to do that. The upshot was that we made some strategic decisions about what business we would have going forward. And actually Happy Sandpit's emerging as a games company. Learning games, learning tools, learning immersions. Now, that meant that I had to accept something that I had been reluctant to accept for years, slow out of the gate anyway, which was that we needed to be more virtual. And I'd always been, I realized, the tools have been around for years, and there are plenty of people who've set the pace here, and there's, this is not even something that clients were particularly averse to prior to the pandemic. it's been fully embraced now, so it's definitely the way forward. But for me, I always had this kind of face-to-face type, experiential type thing. That's always what I prefer. Ironically, we were just until this latest wave being asked to come in to play games in rooms full of people again, just especially in September and October. So we'll probably see more of that, and so we'll kind of have a sort of a dual aspect to what we're doing. But we have got some great virtual tools now, some virtual games. Those things are real world as well, so we can do both. And it's actually an interesting time for us because now we're looking for partners all over the world. We've got one in Italy. The games are in Italian. But I can see a whole change in what's going on, And that probably wouldn't have happened if it hadn't been for the pandemic. So swings and roundabouts.
Wow, that's amazing. So it gave you the space. It forced you to reinvent yourself.
Yeah, basically, I wouldn't have made the change without it. I doubt I'd even have seen the wood for the trees without it, to be completely frank. But I had to, and it turned out that there's some good in this. So 2022 is looking like an exciting, fun year for us.
Wow.
Has the game brought in the benefits of scale?
Yeah, so thanks, Hilton. I mean, it's an interesting thing, this, because... So the game in particular, the one that we've been promoting quite actively, is called Iceberg, and it's analogous to the Titanic. It enables you, it gets people into teams, and they solve problems by they solve problems that don't have an answer, they don't have a solution, they're fundamentally unsolvable, and they have to use the core values of the organization, therefore, to pick a direction, and that's what that is. Now, that was a workshop that I ran. I developed that around about 2017, I think, in response to something. Usually things get developed in response to something. And I played Iceberg quite a lot. And then the one day I found that I had to replace myself at short notice. The two sessions that were supposed to happen one after the other suddenly had to be run at exactly the same time. And so I brought in a facilitator who I love deeply, who I respect enormously. I mean, she's a very, very skilled person, but even so, it was easy to teach her how to do this. And I kind of thought to myself, hold on a second, if it's that easy to facilitate, it doesn't need me. It just needs a facilitator, and that could be anybody. And then the light bulb went off. Why don't I put this in a box? Why don't I package this into a kit? And so Iceberg went and became a boxed up product, and I didn't have a particular strategy for it at the time. That was 2018. Yeah, maybe the beginning of 2019. And I didn't have a plan for it because I was busy with some other projects. So I just stuck it on LinkedIn and said, hey, here's this thing. And I took orders from Colombia, from Australia, from Singapore, from Bulgaria, from the Netherlands. I mean, the United States. I did not see that coming. And suddenly it occurred to me, hold on, there's an international opportunity here for Happy Sandpit, which had simply, international for me meant Namibia and Botswana, right? That's kind of what it meant. And all of a sudden it didn't. It meant other things. And that's where the language variant thing started to come in, because one of the customers was a company called Evidentia in Milan. And they bought it, and they do some training in English, but they said, look, can we translate this into Italian? And I said, well, with pleasure, right? Go ahead and do so. And so that's where that came along. But so there was already, to my mind, a bit of an international opportunity there. And then obviously it being virtual has just increased that. It being virtual has just enabled us to go many, many, many steps further. So yeah, in terms of the clients we've been playing with, they are in fact all over. It's still we're doing some face-to-face stuff again, and that's obviously in South Africa, and that's lots of fun. But we played games with people in really obscure locations now.
Colin, what is the change that you've noticed, that you said earlier that you've made sense of it now?
Here's what I thought going into the first lockdown, the beginning of 2020. I thought that, like I said, culture would get a major upgrade. It was that you're moving people out of the office, you're having to manage them differently, get different outputs, and this is going to be the first thing that's on people's minds. But it wasn't. It wasn't on people's minds at all for about 6 months. And I think I liken it to this. So we've developed a workshop called, it's building an office in Yemen, right? And I'm writing a book based on the research that's gone into that called, So You Opened an Office in Yemen, Now What? And Yemen for us is a metaphor for remote working. And essentially it goes like this. We think that round about between March and April last year, maybe February and April last year, round about 2.4 billion branch offices opened up all over the world on people's dining room tables and at their kitchen nooks, and, on days when they couldn't face the world from bed. I mean, we all did that. Those were never, so the way they were positioned was, we're going to go home, we're going to work from home for a little while. So fundamentally, we were only ever tourists in Yemen, right? We put up a pile of books on the dining room table and put the laptop on top of that. We sat on the dining room chair. It wasn't great. It wasn't particularly efficient. The kids were around. None of this was very good, but it was okay because it was temporary. And then people were going into the office to take away their office chair because they needed to have a decent chair. And companies were sending out, sort of 5,000 Rand gift cards to go and get yourself a lap desk, get yourself this, get yourself a decent set of headphones, get set up because we're going to be here for a while. But it still wasn't a particularly good response, right? We're no longer just doing the touristy things. We're kind of get a bit settled in, but we still haven't made the decision to stay. But then as time progressed, it turned out actually we live in Yemen now. Like, this isn't going away. This is where we live. And that means we have to start coming up with some very different responses. And that's where culture started to creep in a little bit more, because we needed to start. We I don't think had even formulated the right questions, much less figured out how to answer the questions of how to do all of this. And I think that, it's just circumstantial. It so happened along the way that a lot of the answers that are required, or a lot of the questions that need to be formulated, happened in the heads of people who were working from home. So the balance of intelligence shifted in organizations away from leaders making decisions to leaders don't have the information to make this decision. But if you've got 50 people working from home, those 50 people will have figured some stuff out about what works and about what's missing. They'll be able to tell you what they feel. They'll be able to tell you, what they're nervous about, what they appreciate. And those things can form a kind of playbook going forward. If we choose to perceive that the center of excellence or the center of intelligence in organizations has shifted. And so that's where we start to build a sustainable office in Yemen. Like, what we've done initially was we said, what do we know about Sana'a, the capital of Yemen? Well, we know it has bus routes and it has bakeries and it has apartment buildings and you can get a cell phone signal. That sounds exactly like Johannesburg, so let's just put out the Johannesburg playbook. But it turned out it wasn't the same at all. And likewise, we were saying, what do we know about working from home? Well, look, it's the same laptop, same software, different room, different chair. Nothing's really changed. Well, it turns out things really changed. And I think what happened when I say that, that I figured it out, initially it was just get people out of the office. And then let's figure out some of the technical things so we can actually connect. So we have to sort out VPNs, firewalls, whatever it might be, all that technical stuff. And then we're good to go. Get people data, But then it became, okay, hold on. We're actually here for the longer term. We need to get, from an operational point of view, we have to get more smart about this. And that took months and months before they actually got to the point where they realized, we're screwing this up a little bit, people aren't happy. People are tired. People are falling out of love with their jobs. People, relationships are fraying. Maybe we actually ought to get back on this culture kick and start thinking about how this feels. And that really only happened, I think, in 2021, though, for us anyway. We did see some of it at the beginning of last year, but it was very little. This year's been quite a busy year of companies trying to figure it out.
I mean, I've been kind of surprised at the resilience of culture in our business. We're exactly as you described. We hardly ever meet up, but it feels like the culture is more or less intact. And I'm wondering if we were lucky. What's your experience in other companies?
No, I think that's a fair assessment, Hilton. I think culture's held up rather well, actually. I think that when it comes down to it, we've realized it's not about the building or the furniture or the quirkiness. We always, the most basic description of culture drives me a little bit nuts, but it actually, funnily enough, it showed itself to have some teeth, is that it's the way we do things around here, right? But the reality is those go-to positions, how we solve problems, how we escalate things, how we communicate, those are the only things we've had. And so when it comes down to it, I think there's those sort of go-to positions that which fundamentally is culture has held up very, very well. I think what's been missing, though, is that we've lost the relationship, and maybe you've been lucky here, or maybe you're just super clever. I know you are, but we've lost the relationship in many ways with between leaders and people. We've lost the relationship between the meaning of work and the work itself. And these are things that I think they're cultural things, and I think these are things that need a lot of addressing. So from the leadership point of view first, I mean, I don't think it's what's happened and what's been said that has been the challenge. I think it's what hasn't happened and what hasn't been said. And I'm not trying to be clever about this. I mean, I genuinely see these things as slightly different. For example, company after company at the end of last year or the beginning of this year went on about how they had their best year ever. And I'd look at them and I'd go, but you realize your best year ever came at the heads and hands of people who put in 17-hour days. Like, first of all, you shouldn't be taking a bow for this, right? Just because you can get that doesn't mean you should. The second thing is that's not sustainable. You can't get a second year out of people working that hard. There is going to be a knock-on effect, and I think that's the loss of the meaning. So I think what's been missing is that because there hasn't been this sort of, the link has been frayed a little bit, if not broken entirely, leaders haven't really been truly aware. And what's been missing is for the CEO of the business to say, listen, guys, I don't want to see anybody sending an email after 5 o'clock on Friday. I switch off my laptop and I want you to do so too. Now, whether people do it or not, they've at least then been given permission, right? They then know that if I do this, well, the CEO has told me to. I've got some backing there. But that was never said. Or indeed, you know what? Switch the damn email servers off. Make sure that they can't deliver an email. Now, of course, there's Slack and there's WhatsApp. I understand we can't shut down all communication channels. But I'm just saying you make a point. And I don't think that point was ever, people were starting work at 6 o'clock in the morning because they're no longer getting into traffic. And that's when they normally leave the house. Well, muzzle, you know what? You leave the house at 6 a.m. Why don't you just get into the bath at 6 a.m. and have a long soak, or go for a run, or go to the gym, or, you know what I mean? For heaven's sake, there's got to be something better than starting work. I just don't see how that's a sensible response. But nobody said it. And because I couldn't see, I think the rise of imposter syndrome, for example, was absolutely huge. Because I didn't feel seen, because I wasn't visible, I worried that you didn't know what I was doing. Mm-hmm. And so I ended up working longer because other people were, and I can't be the only one who isn't. And then there are other things that begin to happen. Like, it used to be common for Colin to leave school, leave work at 12 o'clock and go and pick up her kid from school and go to Pick and Pay on the way home and buy some groceries, drop the kid off. She's back at work at 1. It's her lunch hour. It doesn't make any difference to anybody what she does with it. And anyway, it's her lunch hour, right? That's the norm. Colin's not there between 12 and 1. We know that. That's what it is. But now that's not visible. And so what happens is she only speaks to her boss once a week. And the day that he phones her ad hoc, she's in Pick and Pay in the middle of the day. And he's going, why are you in Pick and Pay? What are you actually doing? And suddenly she's on the receiving end of unwarranted doubt. But that's just not fair, because actually the reality is she's not doing a single thing different to what she used to do, but it's not visible. And so I think those sorts of things changed relationships in really negative ways. And they were all, there was no evil perpetrated here, right? There was no bad nut stuff going on. We just didn't really see it. We didn't really think it. And then when it comes to losing the meaning of work, I mean, that's the other big knock-on effect. I mean, all the talk of the great resignation that's going on, whether that's true or not, I don't know. But I can understand why it would be. Because I think a lot of people who used to go and work in offices with really nice people, in a nice environment with great coffee machines and lunch dates with colleagues and all of this kind of stuff, what suddenly dawned on them while they were working from home alone in their apartment is that all they do all day is sit on Excel. Now, that's all they've ever done, right? Is sit on Excel all day, but that wasn't the only part of their world. Their world was multifaceted. There were multiple parts to it. Now there weren't. All those parts have been stripped away, and the reality is the job ain't that good. Like, if you think back to 15-year-old you, if they looked at you now and went, this is what you're doing with my life, this is what you're doing with my future, are you out of your mind? This isn't cool. But I think that's what happened with a lot of people. I think they've just fallen out of love with their jobs. Once it was stripped down to the bare components, and this is all it is, it just isn't particularly fulfilling or inspiring or anything. And I think we could have done a better job of that as well, by just somehow finding better ways to create that community and so on. But it first required us to be a little bit more exploratory, a little bit more curious, and I don't think we were. Mm-hmm. I think we just went about things in a very routine way.
I do have a sense that companies that weathered this the best were the companies that didn't have an obsession with presenteeism in the first place. Those that didn't care about the times that you were in the office and the focus was more on delivery than on the outputs probably weathered this the best.
So and I think, but there's been a range of strange things, Hilton. I think you're right. I think, first of all, companies that were naturally good at, compassionate, thoughtful leadership were able to weather this. Companies that weren't found it really hard. There's no doubt whatsoever that the companies that did well were the companies that already had this in hand. So I'd 100% agree with you there. I think the one thing is, the bit we're going to have to learn is that our managers are not equipped to manage this way, and the solution to that is not to go back to the office per se, but to retrain managers. And I think a lot of organizations have just kind of gone, it's too hard to do this, so we're just going to go back to the office. And it's like, well, the problem you have with that, very simply, is that you think about the coastline of South Africa. I don't know how international this podcast is, so let me just explain. The coastline of South Africa has got about 300 little hamlets all along it, which are absolutely idyllic places to be. The coastline is beautiful. The beaches are perfect. The sun is hot. It's fabulous there. but you can't work there because there's nothing happening unless your work is remote. And so at the beginning of lockdown, I know a lot of people that went to places like, I don't know, Kenton-on-Sea, just moved there because they got to lock down somewhere fun. And they've never come back. They've never been required to come back to the office. But then I talked to a very significant employer in South Africa, a big financial services company that went fully remote this year. And basically they made the decision that's what they're going to be from now on. So the office space is fundamentally gone. It's been reduced to 10%. There's some shared space, hot desking you can do. But other than that, they're all at home. And I said, well, that sounds great. Okay, you've made that decision. I don't know if it's the right one or the wrong one. I don't think you do either, but I admire your bravery. Does that mean people can live anywhere? And they go, well, no, their jobs are in Johannesburg. And I go, but they're not, though. And this is the problem. So I can understand you can't just have a bunch of people moving to Bermuda because there are tax changes and there's a lot of complexity in that. But if those sorts of challenges aren't there, what earthly difference can it honestly make? I mean, so they say they want you within 24 hours of an office space. Well, that's all of the country. In fact, it's all pretty much within, give or take, check-in times, delays, Uber rides to the airport and back is all within sort of 5 hours of any airport, so of any office. So this is all just a bit bonkers, but it's evidence that I don't think we've figured out the questions yet. We haven't figured out what an office is even for. We kind of gave up a bunch of bad habits last year, and a lot of organizations are saying pick the habit back up. And I think I'm not against an office. I'm not against going to an office. I just think we need to have clarity about what our reasons are, and that means we've got to ask some different questions. We're not asking the right ones.
So, Colin, I want to just pick up on a point that really resonated for me, which was we need to retrain our managers. And I'd love to know what I can do to improve the engagement and to, try different, we play games, we meet for a stand-up. But, for example, our end of the year team event was meant to be on Monday. That whole thing's cancelled. So what are some of the tips that as a manager you can, learn to be better equipped to deal remotely?
So I think it's really quite simple, I think, Colin. There's probably a million moving parts to this, but the one thing you have to be able to do is you have to be comfortable managing outputs, which means you have to be willing to trust people. And that's right in itself a massive thing. But I'll always ask the question, if you don't feel you can trust your people, why did you hire them in the first place? At the end of the day, and I'll always come back to the old adage, you deserve the people you've got on balance and over time. So if you've inherited a group of people, maybe that's not true, but on balance and over time, you deserve the people you've got. If people perform and get on with it, and they're team players and all that kind of stuff, take a bow, because that didn't happen without leadership. Whereas if they're slovenly and slow and do bad work and have a bad attitude, that's on you, man. You did that. That's a reaction to leadership. And the same thing goes for if people are not working remotely, if they're not working adequately at times when you can't see them, that's on you, right? Somehow, I don't know what it is that they're doing, whether they're just not getting the work in on time, or the work isn't bad, or you can't find them, or something like that. And so I think it's time to have much more human conversations, where we've been used to managing by diktat, perhaps, or been used to managing, sort of a little bit of command and control. It actually comes down now to those human conversations, where you're actually going to sit with somebody and say, this is the work that we've agreed needs to be done. Now, I need to know about your circumstances. How are you able to deliver this? What are the inhibitors? There are going to be some, and some of them are going to be unique. And for the most part, For the most part, people are able to just get on with stuff. They just need a little bit of, but then the other conversation becomes, how much communication do you need from me? I mean, how much communication do I need to be giving you here? How often do we need to be speaking? We can't walk past each other anymore. You can't just pop into my office. So what do we need to? And I think we need managers need to protect their people from incessant meetings. They need to take the brunt there. They need to take the weight off people. They need to be aware that where work was arduous and tough before, working in an office, now it's just emotionally draining sitting in front of a screen. So I think there's a whole range of more human, sort of empathetic things that managers need to be doing. Beyond all of that, though, I think we need to also just not get too carried away here. The bottom line is, I think a lot of people like working from home. I think a lot of people are actually fairly comfortable with it. It's the perceived lack of control in all of that, I think, which worries people more than anything. It's not sitting at home. I mean, you know what? I always joke, you could get people back to the office if you could just change the laws about wearing jogging pants to work and smoking while you work. Because, people have got used to, having a smoke in their jogging pants and maybe, having a little drink at 3 o'clock in the afternoon or whatever. Nobody could see. It's all fine. If you could get away with that. But I think I think for a lot of people there are some really good things about this. We've settled into a way of working, a way of being, which is quite good. I don't know if that's helpful.
Yeah, it's very helpful. I mean, I've got a team that delivers and produces a high velocity, but my question really for me is how do I support them more? And it's that communication bit, like how much is too much,
Yeah.
understanding their life circumstances. And I think we're all exhausted. This has been, I think, a very tough year. And it's just having the compassion when balls are dropped to not overreact to them. And and as a leader, there's a lot of responsibility, to get the work done and to sell the business. So everyone's under pressure.
Can I tell you something, Colin? I did a time and motion study on myself about a decade ago, where I literally just set an alarm, and every half an hour I stopped and I wrote down what I'd done in that 30 minutes. And completely honest, right? And it turned out that I was doing about 3.5 hours worth of work per day. Now, that's terrible, right? I mean, I presented this to a friend of mine who said, well, you got me beat. I don't do anything like that much. But I was at the office for 9, 10, and I didn't count meetings as work. And I'd have conversations with people in the office which were helpful, but I didn't count those as work. I just counted this time that I was actually producing stuff that led to output. And that's all I was doing. And yet I was completely on top of my job, completely on top of it. So in fact, I was only working half the time that was allocated, and the rest of it is that community stuff, is that conversational stuff, is that human-to-human interaction stuff. That stuff's been missing, all right? It's gone. They say work will expand, it will expand to fill the time allocated to it or something like that.
Parkinson's law.
There you go.
Yeah.
And so I managed to make 3.5 hours last 10 and come away thinking, wow, that was a long day. But it wasn't really. I wonder whether or not, if we're managing outputs only and we're taking out the distractions, if it is possible for us to reframe the workday. Now, this is dangerous territory, right? But this is where I say that the questions haven't been asked yet. Because I don't think any of us wants to lose productivity. We don't want to lose, I mean, as business owners, as managers, as responsible people, we can't afford those things to slip. We have targets to hit. We have things that we need. We have customers to serve. But if people are genuinely not doing 8 hours a day anyway, and the work is getting done to a satisfactory level, can we knock a day off? Can we go to a 4-day work week? Or can we go to a 6-hour work day? I mean, can we realistically do things like this and not lose anything? These are questions that I think are worth asking. Now, if the answer is no, then the answer is no. But I would imagine for a lot of organizations, the answer is probably yes. You could have exactly the same productivity with less time on the job. That right there is a very effective way, I think, of solving stress and tension and burnout. I mean, it's the obvious thing to do. So I'd like to see those sorts of things get explored.
I know Hilton wants to make a point, but just before you go on, you see, I do believe that the relationship building you were doing is work. So although the 3.5 hours was very concentrated and you were doing your output, all of those conversations, especially at a senior level, is considered work.
I'd agree.
So, but I hear you. I do hear you. Over to you, Hilton.
Thanks. Yes, I don't think anyone works a full 8-hour day. There's always some downtime and time to just think. But I want to come back to what are the changes managers need to make? For example, what does a good manager look like? I think that's something that will be answered more in the next few years.
And I think you're right. I think we've probably got a 3 to 5 year window here where I think companies that have gone fully remote might discover that they actually don't work quite as well as they wanted to. Companies that have decided to go back to the office might find that they haven't made the right decision either. Hybrid seems to be a logical thing to do, i.e. having a place where people can commune, having a place where you can actually get people together, having a central place for, I mean, not everybody has all the same office equipment, and sometimes there are things you need to do. You need to come in and print some reports and collate them, and you want some sort of consistency. I mean, it's literally tinker toys, but still, having a place to do that, I think, might actually make some sense. But in the meantime, having people having that kind of freedom. But in order to trust, you are going to have to let go of some stuff, right? And that's what you said, Hilton, I think. And let me just build on that. I remember, and so my background was in publishing, my background was in magazines. And I remember at one point, the first time I ever had to hand over the editorship of one of my magazines. I was the editor, I had a deputy editor, and I needed to step away and get involved in some other parts of the business. And so I said to my editor, it's yours now. And the one thing I knew I had to do, I trusted that she knew how to pull the magazine through. I trusted that she knew how to get it done. But we had a different approach to how that work would happen. And I had to just step away from any kind of processes that had worked for me and go, those are no longer relevant. It's literally the output that's relevant. At the end of every month, I need to see a magazine. The quality needs to be this. It needs to be on time. It needs to be this, that, and the other. Do that for me, and I'm going to stop. I'm not going to visit the sausage factory. I'm just going to allow that. There's some delicious Viennas in the fridge, and I'm going to enjoy them on a roll. And that's basically all it's going to be. But it was hard. But then the question that I think a lot of managers might have is, well, then what's my job? If all these guys are going to do this stuff on their own, I mean, who even needs me? And the truth is, I think it's time for us maybe to look at an inverted org structure altogether. We typically draw org structures with the CEO at the top and the executive team underneath. And then as you work down, you get to the bottom rungs of the organization where you've got your call center agents or your customer service representatives or something like that. But those call center agents and customer service representatives are the only people who actually ever speak to customers. And the only reason the business exists is customers, right? So none of this has really made a lot of sense for a long time. But I think there's now we're under a bit of pressure to think about this stuff in a more complex way. And I think if you were to invert it literally where the CEO is at the very bottom of the org structure and the executive team is just on top of him or her, those people form the foundation of a building, right? So you can't build a building without a foundation. It will fall over. And the bigger the building and the more complex the building, the deeper and stronger the foundations need to be. And if those people consider themselves to be the foundations of the building rather than the leaders of the building, then automatically their view is slightly different. They are there to support. They're not just there to direct. And they cannot, by the way, you can't have the foundations of a building having a bunch of unconnected bricks underneath. That also is no good. It's got to be interlocking. It's got to be one interlocking mesh of concrete and steel. So it goes with the leadership team that they have to be tightly intertwined. And they really should have only two focal areas, right? Strategy and culture. If they're doing those, execution has got nothing to do with that level whatsoever. Now that should be the way it is anyway, but it's frequently not the case. I've sat in executive meetings where we've literally had long conversations about whether or not people should be able to bring in sauce from home to warm up in the microwave oven in the kitchen because somebody got burnt with it. And I don't even understand why that topic was on the table in that room. But I mean, so we get mired down. So this prevents that from happening because on top of the managers, on top of the executive team is the managers. Now, they used to be the people that were on top of the call center agents, pushing down. There's that very depressed gray area in the middle of the organization where they're not responsible for setting strategy. They may not believe in it, and they may actually, have an objection to it, but they have to swallow it down and push it down onto people who know that it won't work. And so nobody likes them, right? Nobody appreciates the work that they do. But in this inverted structure, middle managers are literally a supporting role for those people who are doing the work. And so what do the managers do? Well, you're not managing anymore, man. You're not counting bums on seats and heads in the office. You're not doing that. You're right. That job's gone away. But all of those people who are out there now pushing, making stuff happen, they need support. Your job is to make sure they've got everything they need. And that is an important role. Now, that involves more coaching, right? That involves maybe some mentorship, but it also just involves making sure that the communication that gets to them is the right one, preventing the wrong messages from getting to them. There's quite a complex role for a manager there. And I would have thought quite a rewarding role as well, quite an interesting and good role. But they're not trained for it. And this is the challenge. We are not trained for that. We're trained to measure inputs. We're trained to count heads in the office. We're trained to do all of that. And when we don't do that anymore, we don't know what to do. And so it's not managers' fault. It's years of conditioning. So this is one of the things that I think needs to change. And this is one of the things where I think, in order for trust to become more of a reality for businesses, we need to rethink this whole thing.
I recently read an amazing article by a lady called Alison Wynn. It's a Harvard article. And she speaks exactly to this, that we are measuring the wrong criteria for success. So she did some research in a consulting environment where they actually are given flexibility of their work hours, but they don't bank it, they don't use it, because there's so much peer pressure and competition. And also because I'm measured on my billable hours, I actually can't make use of that, because it means that I'm not going to come out as successful ultimately, because I can't bill those hours. And I think her point about changing what we measure and what does success mean in an organization is the thing that's going to shift this thinking.
Yeah. So I mean, I would fully agree with that. I mean, there was lots of talk. It became very in vogue to speak about unlimited leave a couple of years back, and how, I think Netflix allegedly started this. Maybe it was HubSpot. Somebody copied somebody. But somewhere along the line, there was this notion that because we're a 24/7 business, because we're a digital business, because we know people are answering support calls at 11 o'clock on a Saturday night because they have to, if we're not able to effectively measure when people are on or off the job, maybe we should just stop. Maybe we should just say to people, do your jobs and use best judgment. And that became very, very popular and sort of a fascinating concept to try and get your head around. But the reality is, I mean, I think it was the LA Times, actually, the employees sued their managers in order to get leave, a proper leave allocation put back on the books, simply because it didn't matter. It wasn't a matter that everybody was taking leave all the time. It was the fact that nobody was anymore. And I think, again, I think there are, I see that the JSE recently has put in a duvet day. I know Investec used to do that. There used to be these things, you can just decide that you're just going to have an off day. And I agree with that kind of thing, but I don't think it's far enough either. I think this whole issue of time on the job versus time off the job is vastly underexplored, and I think it's a fascinating thing. I've been an advocate for years of having an allocation of well days as well as sick days. You've got your sick days. If you wake up and you're really sick and you phone in and say, I'm not coming to work today, that's ad hoc, right? Nobody's planned for that. And what happens to your team? They work around it. You're not in today. Okay, it's a bummer, but that's not great, but we'll get around it. And that's generally what happens. So it's okay if somebody just doesn't pitch up for work. We can manage. So why don't we, but if you take a sick day and you're not actually dead, everybody just figures you're just pulling a sickie, right? Try and pull a sick day on a Monday or a Friday and try and get away with that. People say, well, we just don't allow sick days on Mondays or Fridays. We don't accept them. Well, if you're actually sick, I mean, what do you want to do, right? So there's all this suspicion. So why don't we just have an allocation of well days as well? Say 3 well days a year. And on a well day, you can phone in and say, listen, I'm feeling way too good to come to work today. I'm going to the beach. It's ad hoc. It's totally unplanned, but at least it's honest, right? It's completely honest. And it's just like a sick day. You'll get around it. You'll work around not having that person there. And I think, because I think the reality is, at a certain level, one gets compensated enough to give up all of one's best hours for somebody else, right? At a certain level, when you reach a certain level of management, a certain level of remuneration or whatever, or a certain level of seniority with a certain level of amount of autonomy, the fact that I give you 8 hours a day, Monday to Friday, and I can't go anywhere else with those hours, the best hours of the week, that's okay because I'm getting paid for it. But prior to that, until you get to that point, you're just having to be on somebody else's clock. And that sucks. And let's not make any bones about it. It sucks. If you really need 8 hours from me, and this has been the whole debate about remote working, well, then we can talk about the 8 hours. But I want to give them when I want to give them. And I know that there's going to be some times when you'll need me to be present. Other than that, I want to swim. It's hot. It's the middle of the day. By the time I get home, it's going to be dark. It's like, what is this actually? And I think these are the things that we can actually have fundamentally better relationships between employer and employee, because the way we are now enables us to do so many things different. And then if you start to, when it comes to time on the job as well, if you're no longer sweating the asset of a 15-year lease on a giant ivory tower in Sandton, then it doesn't matter anymore,
I just wanted to ask, as a closing thing, what were your best readings in the last year?
Oh, you're going to hate me for this, but I can honestly, I don't really know. Here's one of those things about my life. I have 3 small children. I also had, desperately trying to resuscitate a business that had decided to kind of go into flatline for a little while. I read almost nothing last year, I think, in all honesty. I tell you what I did. In one way, I purposefully limited what I was reading because I found that I was beginning to become too informed about too many things that didn't actually bother me or didn't actually affect me. And I just knew too much about them, politics and all of this kind of stuff. And I found that was actually having a really negative impact on being too informed just wasn't helpful. One great book was Atomic Habits by James Clear. So that was definitely a worthwhile read. Yeah, really super book. Well worth all the sales it's had. I subscribe to his newsletter as well. I think it's absolutely amazing. And then I guess the other one that comes to mind was the Barack Obama's memoirs, his memoir after of his presidency. I always read those. I read those prior to his. I read George W. Bush's back in 2008.
And maybe just before we end, what can companies, like if we wanted you to come into Omnicore, how would you help with your game? How does it work? Could you tell us a bit more about it?
Yes, thank you, Colin. So the game is called Iceberg. Like I say, it's analogous to the Titanic. It follows a narrative arc. Players form teams, and those teams are the senior members of crew on board the Titanic, and they've got to make decisions. And then we throw them fundamentally unsolvable problems, and we say, solve these. Now, if I was to give you one of those, either of you, you'd solve it because you'd make a sacrifice. You'd figure out what to do. But if I gave you, put 6 more people on a team with you and said, solve the problem now, it's almost impossible for you to reach consensus. And these are quite difficult problems to solve. And so when we put the core values of the organization in the middle, all of a sudden, we elevate the values to a point where we think a lot of organizations think they have core values, but they actually have a set of vague preferences masquerading as core values, right? They're not married to them. They couldn't really tell you what they are. They don't really achieve anything through them, etc. But with this game, for the first time ever, people are actually having to debate them, discuss them, think about them, dig into them. And then with the way they'll literally solve the problem. They'll tell us what the core values told them to do. So being values aligned, we think we have to do this. This is where we have to go. Then we'll ask them, okay, fine, having done that, which of the values were most helpful? And there's another aha moment where we're actually kind of saying, core values have a dynamic hierarchical order. They can shift and up and down. It's a bit like a DJ's mixing desk, right? Depending on the track a DJ is playing, they'll turn the bass up, they'll turn the treble down. They're always adjusting for the perfect sound. You never turn the bass all the way off because that track's going to sound terrible. And likewise, none of the core values are ever not true, but they do have a dynamic hierarchical order. Sometimes some are more true than others given a situation. And that's a bit of an aha moment as well, because it kind of goes, there's some critical thinking around these is not only possible, it's a requirement. So you'll have various teams on their ships out at sea solving these problems. Then they'll go through the door onto the bridge where the facilitator will take them back one by one. What did you do? And everybody gets to go and have a look at what the other teams did. And then that forms a conversation about, are we philosophically aligned in the solving of this problem? Did we get to it in different ways? Does that represent a subcultural difference only? Or is there something more foundational than that? And so it's a bit of make-believe. It's a bit of fun. We think it solves a problem that is worth solving. So a couple of hours, 2.5, 3 hours or whatever, and you get through 5 scenarios from before the ship sets sails to the commission of inquiry afterwards, right?
That sounds amazing. And we'll put all the details in the show notes so people can reach out to find out more. Okay, well, yeah, I think, Hilton, to wrap up, any final closing comments from you?
No, thanks, Colin. That's been fabulous. I'd be keen to take the conversation forward. Just need to marinate a little.
It's been super. I've really enjoyed it.
Thank you so much for listening all the way to the end. We really hope you enjoyed the episode. It would help us a lot if you subscribe to our podcast on iTunes and Apple Podcasts. Give us 5 stars if possible, and check out our website www.omnicore.co.za. You'll find our previous episodes and other blogs and helpful resources, and we look forward to connecting in the next episode.